across to Ilija Rašović. He's a colleague of mine, actually, at the University of Birmingham, and we are going to have a little bit of a chat about carbon. How are you this afternoon, Ilija?
I'm all right, thanks, Adrian. Yeah, I've got my cap ready, so I better.
Fantastic.
Put it on.
Got to wear the right uniform. Good. Well, so we were just going to have a little chat about carbon, and we've both studied it, and so it's a fascinating element. First of all, it's all around us, yeah? So do you want to just explain? We've heard a little bit from Sid, actually, but it's all over the place.
Yeah, so carbon is it's an incredibly abundant material and or element, and it really is the foundation of everything around us. It's easier to kind of list things that aren't made from carbon than try to list things that are. So say, for example, I don't know, the Coke can in your fridge, that's aluminium, right? So that's something not made from carbon. But carbon is really interesting because it is so abundant on Earth, and it is able to react with lots of other elements to create the building blocks of life and other materials. And it has this kind of, if you like, Goldilocks almost reactivity. So it's not so reactive that it just reacts with everything. And it's also not so inert that it doesn't react with anything. So it just sits in this perfect spot. And because of that, everything from the building blocks in your body to wood and other organic matter in the world is made from it.
Indeed, yes. And we were just hearing from Sid, obviously it's in the air with carbon dioxide and it's critical for photosynthesis.
Yeah, absolutely, exactly. And so we talk a lot about, you may have heard about like carbon footprints, particularly now in our current energy crisis that we have. So we burn lots of fossil fuels. They're so called because we get those fuels from kind of oil and coal, which originally come from dead organic matter, millions of years old. And all that carbon that is stored in them then gets released back into the air. And so there is a constant cycle actually on Earth, which is perfectly natural, but we just have to make sure that we keep it in balance.
Yes, indeed. And so carbon's interesting as well, because if you look at the pure form of carbon, there's actually different types of that. And some of us will be very aware probably of some common pure forms of carbon.
Yeah, so talking about its ability to bond with in different structures. So hopefully we're all aware with two very common ones, and these are diamond and graphite. So
I've got a pencil here.
Yeah, very good, nice. Unfortunately, I've only got a small one here. So, so diamond and graphite are what we call allotropes of carbon, and one way I like to remember that word is it's like alligator but spelled with an O instead of an I, and so I always imagine kind of like diamond and carbon-based alligators in these swamps as a kind of image to remember the word. And basically what that means, an allotrope of carbon it's a different structural form. So in diamond, all of the carbon atoms are bonded to 4 other carbon atoms in 3D space, and this is what makes diamond so hard. So there we go. Thank you, Adrian. I unfortunately don't have a model. So
little molecular model there for people to have a look at. So there's one of the carbons that you were just talking about, and then you can see, well, let's lose that one with the 4 coming off it in a sort of tetrahedral shape.
Precisely, yeah. And it's precisely because of that 3D structure and these covalent bonds which hold the atoms together that it makes carbon so hard. And in fact, it's the hardest material that we know. In contrast, graphite is only bonded, each carbon atom is only bonded to 3 carbon atoms instead. And what happens when you do that is you end up with this, there you go, that's a lovely way of seeing it. You end up with this layered structure. So within each layer, each carbon atom is bonded to 3 others in a kind of flat sheet. And then represented in Adrian's model here, we have these kind of yellowy orange sticks between layers. And those aren't actually covalent bonds. They just represent very weak intermolecular forces between the layered sheets.
So I probably have to just butt in and speak so that people can see the video, because I have a feeling it's only showing you big. So I'm just saying a few things there just so that people hopefully can see me holding the graphite structure. And as Ilija was just explaining, we've got the weak bonds, which are the yellow ones, and then we've got the strong bonds, which form the hexagon there.
Precisely. And it's precisely because of those weak bonds that we actually have some interesting uses of graphite. So these sheets can slide over each other. And so we actually use graphite in as lubricants in industrial applications. And more importantly, you are, as Adrian said at the beginning, you're aware of it being used as the lead in your pencil. So even though it's called a pencil lead, it's not actually made from lead, it's made from graphite. And in fact, that's where the word graphite comes from. So grapho is ancient Greek for write. So you all know about biographies, writing about a life, and autographs, writing yourself. So graphite is, its name comes from the fact that you can use it to write.
Fantastic. And I've also got a molecular model here of diamonds. So I showed you earlier just the single, or just a few, but this is actually what it looks like. And actually, if you hold it in a particular angle, you can kind of see layers. It's actually quite difficult to do it with the camera, but you can almost kind of look down layers there. I'm trying my best. But actually, they're not hexagonal layers in the same way as graphite, are they? They're actually contorted. So they're kind of sort of hexagonal if you look in the right direction, but actually they are up and down, if you like. They're not flat like with graphite.
And the beautiful thing about showing that model there is that you can, if any of you have seen, you know, diamonds, maybe in real life, but also on films, you'll actually see that that structure on the molecular and atomic scale is actually carried forward then into a scale that you can see, which I always think is one of the beauties of doing material science and looking at these things, which is quite good.
Excellent. Now, there's some other exotic forms of carbon, and I guess we could probably, first of all, even though historically may not be the right order to talk about it, but let's talk about graphene, because that's fairly similar to graphite, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is kind of getting now into my particular interests, which are what we call these nano forms of carbon. So nano just mean, again, it's from ancient Greek. I believe nanos actually means dwarf, or meant dwarf. So nano just means incredibly small. We talk about a nanometer, and that means a billionth of a meter. So when we talk about nano forms of any material, such as nanocarbons, they have a dimension which is less than 100 nanometers big, so less than 100 billionths of a meter. So graphene is a great example of this, and it's one of the more recently discovered carbon nanomaterials, and we'll talk about some more in a minute. But it's one of the ones which has gained most traction and kind of visibility in the public eye. And what graphene is just a single sheet of the graphite that Adrian just showed there in the molecular structure. So it's just a single hexagonal sheet. And in 2003, it was actually first isolated in quite a cool experiment by Andrei Gaiman and Kostya Novoselov, who won the Nobel Prize for this, where they just used Scotch tape, or basically sellotape, and got a block of graphite and kept peeling the sellotape off the surface. And what they were doing was successively getting to smaller and smaller numbers of graphene layers until they ended up with just one. And that is what graphene is.
So I've got another model here. This is actually just chicken wire. So if people have got chicken wire at home, they can have their model graphene layer, because it's just one layer of hexagons. I don't know whether you can see that there, but it's actually quite tricky to see. And so you're sort of alluding, Ilija, to something that can happen with graphene and making other kinds of structures. So one of them, of course, is a nanotube. So what exactly is a nanotube?
Yeah, so here we go to kind of the second carbon nanoform. So a carbon nanotube, you can actually think, and the chicken wire is a really nice way of showing this, you can think of it as a rolled up graphene sheet. So you still keep these hexagonal structures, but instead of a flat sheet, you've now rolled it up. And these typically have diameter of tens to hundreds of nanometers. And hopefully
I'm going to show you there. I have rolled up one of the sheets of chicken wire, and now you can see it is actually a tube. I'm looking down the tube towards the camera, and then you can see it's rolled up, and it's a cylinder. And it's a cylinder of one layer of graphite, so a graphene sheet rolled up to give us the nanotube. And that's just one example of a nanotube, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's important to note here that these models actually that we're showing are scarily accurate. They are very accurate representations, just on a far larger scale to what actually happens on the atomic level. But with nanotubes, what you can also get, that's what we call a single walled nanotube. So it just has one wall of carbon, but you can actually get them where they are nested, and much like a Russian doll. And you can actually get these multi-wall carbon nanotubes where there is one carbon nanotube surrounded by another one and often surrounded by another. And you can build up some quite exotic structures like that, which is quite nice.
So I can kind of do that rather messily with my chicken wire. I've actually got 2 pieces of chicken wire and I have put one cylinder inside another. And it's really tricky actually, but that is a nested nanotube inside another. This is a 2-wall nanotube. And as you've just said, you can have multi-wall nanotubes where you have more and more and more of these layers rolled up like a carpet really, except not a spiral. They're all concentric, aren't they?
Yeah, exactly.
Brilliant. Well, the last one I wanted to talk about, there's another special form of carbon. It's related to the carbon nanotube in a way, isn't it? But what happens is if you introduce pentagons into the hexagon, something rather strange happens, doesn't it?
Yeah, so this is the material which is closest to my heart and which I have the greatest interest in. It's something, so as you've noted, as Adrian just said there, in the graphene and carbon nanotube structure, we have all these carbon atoms arranged in hexagonal patterns. Now, what happens is that you can introduce pentagons into that hexagonal pattern, and it forces these structures to curl in on themselves. And unfortunately, oh no, I do actually have it. Good.
Okay.
I thought that I actually left this, but I do have my
Fantastic.
final
You
prop.
do.
It's a bit dirty, I'm afraid, but what actually ends up is that you end up with a football. And this is no exaggeration. These structures that we're forming are called fullerenes. So when you introduce pentagons, as you can see here, that all the pentagons are isolated from each other, and every vertex, every corner on a football corresponds to a carbon atom in a fullerene, and every edge corresponds to a bond between those carbon atoms. And this still blows my mind because a fullerene, so when you do that, and you can grab an old school football and count them if you really want yourself, I can guarantee you there are 60 corners on this football, which means that there are 60 carbon atoms in this fullerene. And we sometimes call it a buckyball because its full name is Buckminster fullerene, or C60 because it has 60 carbon atoms. And these spherical cage-like structures are really, really interesting.
So I've got the molecular model here, and you can see that it does look very much like the football. And these are the carbon atoms all connected, as we just heard, the 60 of them. And I've actually done it with different colors, tried to as well, like on the football. So you can see the red are the pentagons, and then the black ones are parts of the hexagons. And there we have a buckyball. But interestingly, you can also make these go out further and further, can't you? So you can have nested buckyballs, just like the nanotubes that we were just showing. Yeah,
precisely. And we call them quite an imaginative name of carbon nano onions. So simply because they are like an onion structure, you have layers upon layers upon layers, different shells. And yeah, those are quite interesting. Similarly, you can also capture atomic species and molecules inside those cages as well. So these are what we call endohedral fullerenes. And basically those, we can think of the fullerenes as molecular prisons, basically. And the structures that get captured inside don't interact with the environment. And this can lead to all sorts of interesting science, which you simply wouldn't be able to do without these buckyballs.
Indeed. And so I understand that in the terms of nanotubes, some of those are referred to as nano test tubes because you can put materials inside those.
Yeah, precisely. So there's a world record actually for the world's smallest test tube. And that is a carbon nanotube. So they actually did a chemical reaction at the bottom of one of these nanotubes, which is quite cool.
Fantastic. Yep. So it's a really, really fascinating science. Carbon, one of the most abundant in terms of it's all around us. And yet it has so many different forms. So Ilija, thank you ever so much for sharing some of the insights into carbon today. Thank you for joining us, and I'll see you again soon.
Cheers, Adrian. Have a good day, everyone.
Bye-bye.